Hi everybody and welcome back. This time we'll take a look at Dev Diary 52 about the Baashidi. The Baashidi are some humans, I guess, that live on the strange peninsula at the very south of Sarhal. So let's see what they're all about. The Dev Diary starts with a quote from Dayak Baare in the foreword of Lessons of the Peace, a treatise on rule. We are the people of Baashi. He who led us from the deserts, he who made treaty with the dwellers of the ocean, he who slew the great chiefs of the Nikuva and took from them their pearls and cowrie shells. It is in this year, which all civilized peoples know as the year of the star Dulasmag, that I write to you of the situation of our people, of the wisdom of Kasri Akun, where scrolls are stacked like coins in a vault, of the wealth of Kasri Marudikia, whose markets never want for the ivory of whale nor elephant, of the honor of Kasri Abi Suinka, who feeds many mouths and guards yet many more from the lizard demons, of the nobility of Kasri Ubakio, where the civilization of the Jasir Jadid meets the savagery of the Tanizu barbarians, of the cunning of Kasri Bariga, whose navigators and traders bring the far-off knowledge of Hales to the shores of the Jasir Jadid, and finally of the queen of cities, Kasri Baashi, the city of glory and death where no man save the noblest or bravest dare dwell. It is with these actors that our tale begins. May fortune and the divine laws of the world smile upon our people, for it is the age of our glory. Who are the Baashidi? The Baashidi are a group of humans living in southern Sarhal, bound by a shared language and historical ties to the hero Baashi, as well as the ancient Jinaka and Ardimya sultanates. Their culture group also includes the Guryadaga, people who strayed at home, an umbrella term used for the people living in the lands that the Baashidi migrated out of long ago. The Baashidi call their home the Jasir Jadid, New Peninsula, and term the lands of the Guryadaga the Jasir Dug, Homeland Peninsula. The culture is split into three groups: the Sukhratbi, who live in the Sukhratba plain, the Debiji, who dwell in the thin peninsular land of the Debij, and the Ashamadi, who occupy the eastern portion of the Ashamadiat plain. There are 5 kingdoms among the Baashidi: Kabika Badabi, Kabika Biraga, Kabika Wegabia, Kabika Wegabiga, Kabika Dadubaka, and Kabilu Gavakiza. Jesus Christ, okay. Kabika roughly translates as royal tribe, while Kabilu being a corruption of the word used in some parts of the Ashamadiat. The Debiji and the Sukhratbi are the original Baashidi, formed as cultures a millennia ago out of migrants from the lands of the Ardimyan Sultanate, as it was destroyed during an event known as the Great Death, a consequence of the Day of Ashen Skies. The distinction between them is partially geographic and political, but also references much of their ancestry. They trace to the Nikuva people, whose tribes occupied much of the Debij in ancient times. The Asahamadi were incorporated into the Baashidi world centuries ago, made up of a mix of Debiji settlers and Baashified Tanizu. They still maintain some traditions from Tanizu, and some of them even practice the rites of the beast memory over Baashidi religion. The Baashidi have an ancient pact with the Merfolk who inhabit the seas around them. Baashidi cities are built with sunken areas and canals to accommodate Merfolk swimming through them, and the great friendship between the two peoples is a source of Baashidi pride and their success as seafarers. The Baashidi are well known for their poetry, with the skill highly prized among all levels of Baashidi society due to their belief in its magical power. Formal court poetry follows specific forms that draw upon mathematical formulations and sacred geometries, while its more folk practice is often as long-form sung tales of an individual's glory or dishonor. Those who master either form are respected for the power they wield, and it is not unknown for even the highest to be struck down by a curse poem from an offended poet. The Ardimya Sultanate and the Great Death. Ardimya was a Jinn, a being of magic and elemental power whose kind ruled over Sarhal and Bulvar at various points in ancient history. Her history prior to appearing in East Sarhal is unknown, but she came from somewhere west, fleeing other Jinn, and led a great caravan of her servants through East Sarhal in an event known as the Great Procession. She gave many gifts to the people of the lands she passed through, something that will be covered in more detail in a dev diary of the redacted system. Interesting. Eventually, she arrived in the lands of the Jasir Dog, where she brought the local tribes under her influence through both gifts and force. Chief among them the tribe of the Nasmanin, who served as her priests. Ardimya's sultanate was a powerful but isolated state. The strongholds of most of her kind were in West Sarhal, and Ardimya had little interest in those of her kind who were not her servants, not even those who fled from the Jinn binders in Bulvar. The lizard folk kingdoms dominated southern Sarhal, which they considered to belong entirely to them. Ardimya spent a great deal of effort staving off lizard folk conquests of her sultanate, a losing war that saw her resources stretched. This all changed in 7700 before Ashen Skies, when the precursor elves defeated Ardimya in a war, forcing her to pay tribute, while at the same time they ravaged the lands of the lizard folk. While the precursors eventually left due to their civil war, Ardimya's image in the eyes of her people was forever tarnished, eventually leading to an assassination attempt by one of her sons, and the Jinn's descent into madness. Matters were made worse when Ardimya was ravaged by the attacks of the Deep Devils, an event which afflicted all of coastal Sarhal. The weakness of their mother and her clear loss of sanity prompted her remaining sons to rebel against her, launching the Sultanate into a civil war. Though Ardimya won the Sun Civil War, her victory would be a bitter and short-lived one. The Day of Ashen Skies occurred only 40 years later, banishing all of the remaining Jinn, including Ardimya. Though this was a catastrophic event for most of the world, it was near-apocalyptic in the Ardimian Sultanate. Enchantments became unbound as magical storms which scoured and warped the land killed millions. Additionally, the Civil War had been a long and bitter struggle between family, a conflict where horrific magic and monsters have been unleashed. Without their masters and with magic changing, these creatures were free to wreak havoc as they wished. None will ever truly know what befell most of the Sultanate's cities, but the survivors who were not simply killed in the initial wave of devastation found themselves locked in battle with the Kul, anthropomorphic humanoid monsters of unknown origin who devoured entire cities of survivors. Most of those who survived became nomads, engaged in a constant, desperate struggle to live in the hostile environment that their home had become, while their heels were dogged by monsters. From among these fragmented bands arose a hero known as Baashidi, a young warrior who fought with legendary skill and valor. He rallied groups of survivors into an army that would eventually slaughter the main mass of Kul, alongside help from the Nasmanin, who had managed to hold the capital city of Ardim Karast against the tide of death. Baashidi was offered a place of honor among those in Ardim Karast, but refused it along the line that his followers had come from the tribes oppressed by Ardimya and the royal tribes. He and his followers went west, while the royal tribes founded the Sultanate of Jinaka, which would eventually collapse in 789, leaving the Guryadaga as nomads dwelling in the lands of the empire they had once ruled. The Guryadaga, as mentioned above, is the name applied to those who remained in the Jasir Dog after the events of the Great Death and Baashidi's march to the west. They are split into 4 royal clans: the Nasmanin, the Kainin, the Mudainin, and the Samanin. All of these are descendant from the original royal tribes of the Ardimian Sultanate, though now split into many disorganized sub-tribes. They called their lands Ardimya's land, from which Kanorians call it simply Ardimya. The Nasmanin managed to hold onto some power after the Great Death, using the magic of Ardimya city to keep their lands fertile and maintain the lifestyle of luxury that they had been accustomed to during the days of the Ardimian Sultanate. However, the magic of the city was damaged by the events of the Great Death, and the desperate Jinakans would send expeditions into the lands visited by Ardimya's procession in search of a way to restore. This would lead to the creation of Buadakinshi as a Jinaka puppet state, though this was the only notable result. The Sultanate would collapse by 789 after Ash, and the Nasmanin dispersed as nomads, attacked by other Guryadaga tribes who had long been envious of their rule over Ardim Karast. In 1444, the Guryadaga exist entirely as nomads, sustained through trading precious materials found in the desert or by offering their services as mercenaries to fight off Kul attacks in the eastern lands of Kabi Kabadabi. They and the lands of Ardimya will see a great change and the birth of something new in the time period of the game. But that is left for a future dev diary. Oh, this sounds fun. There's Merfolk. Bashi first met the Merfolk in 60 after Ash, when he and his followers attempted to escape a horde of Kekul via hastily constructed rafts. The Merfolk, recent arrivals to the region, took pity upon the humans and saved them, guiding their vessels to a safe island where Bashi swore a pact with the Merfolk chiefs and founded the city of Kasri Bashi, above the nascent Merfolk villages there. From this point, the Merfolk and the Baashidi were joined in cause, and the two people helped each other prosper, both refugees from lost homelands. Merfolk do not know their own origins, but know that their ancestors felt a great sense of loss for an unknown homeland. Whether they were once land-dwelling people or refugees from the deep sea is unclear, but they arrived in Sarhal a few decades after the Day of Ashen Skies, leading some Canorians to believe that they were Ruinborn. The Baashidi themselves believe their friends to be exiles from the realm of water, fleeing the collapse of a cruel Jinn's realm in the same way that they did. The Merfolk are a generally xenophobic people who prefer to deal with the above-seas world through their Baashidi partners, trusting in their ancient friendship and the respect that the Baashidi have for them to ensure they get a fair deal. Many Sarhali peoples have mistaken isolated Merfolk sightings for the presence of water spirits or godlings, and the people of Fangaula and Fakhvanosi both have a reverence for the creatures, even if the Merfolk themselves avoid contacting them. Merfolk can breathe air but must keep their skin wet in a similar fashion to marine mammals. They and the Baashidi have invented forms of magic and crude devices which allow them to sustain themselves on land for prolonged periods, but these are expensive and don't make up for their lack of legs, meaning only magically adept or wealthy Merfolk can spend any real time away from water. For the most part, their existence is confined to the seas and to areas near the coast. Those Merfolk living close to or within Baashidi settlements often consider themselves to be citizens of the above-the-seas world and enjoy full equality within it. The Merfolk are not the only denizens of the deep, but they are the only ones that are friendly. The Baashidi have heard tales from their friends of monsters and vile creatures beneath the waves, and are sometimes requested to send aid when the Merfolk kingdom finds themselves in a war with those below. The Merfolk themselves will be in the game, though their culture won't exist on the map. We'll learn more about the Merfolk estate and how we can interact with the Baashidi's underwater allies in a future dev diary. Ooh. The Baashidi themselves settled in various small villages near the coasts and their Merfolk allies. Over time, these settlements grew into city-states which would find themselves as tributaries of the Jinaka Sultanate, who saw themselves as the premier power in southern Sarhal. They ruled over many South Sarhali humans in addition to the Baashidi. In 1480 after Ash, the expanding lizard folk kingdom of Karask would go to war with Jinaka over the lands of the Jasir Jadid, making most of the Baashidi their tributaries. The era of lizard folk rule would allow the Baashidi to grow and develop their power bases under the mostly distant lizard folk. And when Karask's power began to decline in the 7th century, the Baashidi were able to become independent. For the first time in history, they were no longer under the shadow of an ancient empire, and were free to choose their own direction as a people. The immediate centuries after the independence of the Baashidi were an age of warfare and strife. as the various Baashidi polities attempted to consolidate their power and gain advantage over their rivals. Perhaps the most important conflict fought in this time is the Dagafita, which marked the end of the period of warfare. The Dagafita was a series of wars that began in 1151, fought as a struggle for dominance of the Ashamadiyat between Kabika Beraga and an alliance of the northern powers consisting of Kabiga Wegabiga, Kabika Dadubaka, and Kabilu Gavakiza. The conflict engulfed the entire Baashidi world until 1208, when Sadeh al-Dak the Wise assassinated his father and brought peace between his kingdom and its rivals. He renounced his claims to the former Beragan colonies in the Ashamadiyat and sent gifts to the north to make restitution for the wrongs committed by his kingdom in the past. The Treaty of the Dagafita would become symbolic of a new era of peace and cooperation in the Baashidi world, remaining still unbroken in 1444. Sadeh al-Tak and his peers were influenced by a new religious movement sweeping through the Jasir Jadid, a codification of the various folkloric beliefs from previous ages. It also taught a philosophy of dedicating oneself to the pursuit of knowledge and understanding of the divine nature of creation. This new religion and an era of peace would be the seed of a Baashidi golden age known as Dasr Sharaf. Rinta seekers, or truth seekers, is a religion developed by the 12th century philosopher Kabil Hadni, who sought truth in the many hundreds of beliefs that fell under the umbrella of the Habab Zar, old exorcism, or old spirits. Hadni's religion taught that the gates to heaven were guarded by mortals who had rebelled against the lesser gods. The true creator had stationed to guide the world and watch over heaven. These gods became corrupted by the power they wielded over the material world, and so the enslaved souls of heaven slew them and spread their remains across the sky, where the dead gods can only weakly inflict their evil upon the world. He believed that the mortals in heaven sought to avoid becoming corrupted by the gods, and would only allow those who achieved enlightenment to pass through the gates. Hadni taught that no mortal could achieve enlightenment in life, but that seeking an understanding of the divine law which undergirds the world would help protect one from the evils the dead gods sought to inflict upon them. The religion is part philosophy of life and part collection of protective rituals, officiated in equal part by learned scholars in formal settings as it is by itinerant ascetic holy men. Rinta seekers is the great pillar of Baashidi and Merfolk life. Its philosophy shapes the way that they relate to each other, and its exhortation to seek knowledge motivates Baashidi scholar adventurers to learn the secrets of the entire world. Regarding magic, there are two types of mages among the Baashidi, Mualim and Darviz. Mualim are studious scholar mages who practice a magical tradition based on reason and logic. Their magic utilizes mystical alignments of numbers and alchemical formulas, and they also derive power from knowledge of astrology and interpreting the movement of the heavens, making them quasi-holy men who are trusted to conduct auguries and ward from evil influence households and courts that hire them. Before casting all but the most basic of spells, they imbibe strange elixirs and do ritual dances, mapping out mystic geometry in order to enter a higher state of consciousness. This trance is described as an intellectual ecstaticness that is believed to partially connect them to the realm of paradise. Many are also scholars of renown, writing treatises on history, philosophy, and mathematics, as well as studying natural laws in order to improve their own magic and alchemy and practicing formal court poetry. Darviz are wandering mystics who practice a mixture of witch doctory and spirit binding alongside ritual trances similar to that of the Mualim. According to tradition, Darviz cannot cut their hair, drink the milk of an animal, carry salt, nor carry any tools for the making or of extinguishing of fire. Peasants and lords alike are obligated to provide a Darviz with hospitality and food, which a Darviz is obliged to repay with a performance of story, music, and dancing, alongside any needed magical aid. Mualim enjoy the same privileges as Darviz, being entitled to hospitality, but see these and the other traditions of the Darviz as relics of a past era and the behavior of misguided folk magic practitioners. Mualim are more trusted by nobility, being highly influential within courts and scholarly circles. Darviz, due to their wandering nature, rarely enter the courts of kings or other nobles, but are often the only source of magical aid that rural villages and the rougher adventurers will be able to gain aid from. Darviz are far more common among the tribal and rural peoples, but no noble would ever turn one of them away or disrespect them. Influential Darviz have made their ways into the courts of kings before and been trusted advisors. In 1444, the Baashidi are in the throes of their golden age, experiencing the benefits of the age of peace and cooperation. When we jump into the game, the Dasr Sharaf is an ongoing event that has the potential to springboard us into success. This is the age of the Baashidi's height as a civilization, and us as players will be able to determine how they will ascend. Open warfare between the Baashidi kingdoms themselves is unthinkable, and their rising power has led them looking outwards for expansion. The island of Zyumaklai is the first step of this expansion, captured from Butuguzi by Kabilu Gavakiza in 1420. It is the first of possibly many Baashidi possessions in the seas far from their home. The other notable expression of Baashidi expansionism is the tiny state of Hisrad, a group of scholar adventurers granted control of a mountain fortress by the queen of Kabika Dadubaka. They use their base to conduct expeditions into lizard folk lands, hunting for ancient knowledge, and have ambitions of conquering their own state there. Only time and us as players will tell if they succeed, and whether they are the precursor to more such expeditions. Hisrad is an interesting tag that is focused around the Baashidi expedition mechanics, which are relevant for all of the Baashidi countries, not just Hisrad and Kabika Dadubaka. They will be talked more about in a future dev diary. The end of the diary takes a look at the trade situation in Sarhal, which is still one of the more exciting things that I am looking forward to. I am expecting this to somewhat bridge the gap between Karnor and Hales, and maybe take down the awesome might of Buvauri down a peg. Reading about ancient Jinn and Merfolk is also quite interesting. I'm very curious, how will the Merfolk shape the region, if at all, and if there is anyone crazy enough to make a mod that flips land and water and allows you to play as Merfolk kingdoms in the water provinces instead of the land ones. Fingers crossed for that. Also, the Anbennar team is constantly looking for contributors, so check out their Discord and Patreon if you haven't yet. This dev diary is strangely long, and I hope you have a great nap. I'll stop here so I don't wake you up, but not before I say thank you to all the Patreons and YouTube members, as well as to the Anbennar developers and supporters. See you soon. Ciao.